the White House, the Congress, which is House and Senate, who is responsible for the open border right now? Who can put an end to this?
The federal government can, okay, and arguably the states can. So I was on Kari Lake's border policy team. So I had a bunch of meetings with Kari over Zoom. I had a bunch of in-person meetings with her and her
God
team.
bless her.
Yeah, and she was going to argue under the War Powers Act of Arizona that they could defend their own border, and we were going to be potentially contracting, big force of private ex-military security forces to come in. 300 people, 9 days after her inauguration. Once she got sworn in, we were going to be on a very, very high profile, high visibility, full gear, locking down certain areas of that porous Arizona border. Okay, and it would have been a big deal. And it would have been very controversial, and you would have had the Biden administration and the Border Patrol telling you couldn't do it, and arguments over the deploying the National Guard to stop us. I mean, it would have been very, very interesting and very, very cool to be a part of that. But you know who owns Arizona politics? The cartel. And the cartel, which influences the Democrat Party. It owns the Democrat Party. Again, it has, you mentioned, in reading a little the bio, we saw forward operating bases where they have full M240s, fully outfitted military. They're a parallel government, the cartels. And
in Arizona.
And they influence, behind the scenes, they influence politics there. And they pay off the homes and mortgages of the politicians. So much money and so much cash flows through Arizona in order to influence that, and in order to break the machines, in order to stymie the voting process, and make sure that a Kari Lake can't wreck their deal.
Okay, so let's then talk Mexican border. Why do you think people flee from Mexico, like originally? What's the problem with Mexico? Why people run from it? Excuse me?
They're not. It's not Mexicans that are coming in.
Yeah, but Mexican, prior to this border crisis.
So prior to this, like throughout the history, let's go back to like the 1980s. Because right now, the Mexicans are staying in Mexico.
Yeah.
And we had 21 different dialects coming over across the border. And some of them were like Guatemalans and maybe some deep South American. But we're talking Chinese nationals right now. We're talking Haitians. We're talking people from Eastern Europe coming through our southern borders. I mean, I filmed on my cell phone just behind me, 50 plus people walking right on the border, just filming me, little selfie photo with people just cruising over right behind us. We just happened to be there at the right time for that one particular incident. We interviewed them all. Cuba, Colombia, the Republic of Georgia. I mean, all over the place, coming through there, claiming amnesty, disappearing into our interior, never showing up for court. Most of them were not. They're just families escaping, mothers and children. No, they weren't. And Border Patrol agents are watching people, hand kids back and forth, the same kids being used to traffic back and forth. It's awful. So, but going back to Mexico, so no difference. I mean, we're neighboring countries wealthy, neighboring countries poor. Okay.
But why is it so poor for decades, for centuries?
Corruption.
Straight out of line.
Corruption. Yeah, it's the same thing. People accumulating power. It's the same thing we're under threat of. Accumulating power is stealing the resources of a country, stealing from the people.
But they got elections, right? There are no dictators in Mexico.
There's also no real elections either. I mean, there are places where the elections are pretty legit. Those countries do exist, and people get fairly elected, but that's a rarity in the world, corrupt world of mankind that we live in, right? Most of these things, they're heavily influenced by all kinds of mechanisms. They're heavily influenced by all kinds of machinations in order to get the outcome that the people in power want.
But just the people, the Mexicans, can do shit there. They can do revolution. They can do. So Argentina, 60 years it was under the socialists, but now Argentina is getting back up.
Vale, afuera.
Yeah, afuera.
Yeah.
Great guy.
Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting. He, people were all freaked out. He's a World Economic Forum guy. He goes and he delivers this beautiful
20 minutes
speech,
tirade,
just destroying the World Economic Forum and destroying the globalists' vision.
Why would they invite him?
Just laying him out because they didn't think he was going to do that.
They're so stupid.
Hubris. Again, a lot of things come down to hubris, arrogance. We're going to influence you. We're going to own you. You're going to be doing what we want you to do. Thanks for playing nice. I appreciate that you're playing those games and looking all tough, but at the end of the day, you're really going to do what we need you to do, right?
Hubris is what? Give me a synonym.
Pride, intense pride. Hubris is amazing arrogance that
I got you.
Blinds people. Yes.
I'm the king of the world. How big the cartel's involvement in Mexico, in the government of Mexico? It's like a shadow, or the second government?
It's a parallel government, yeah.
But for real?
Oh yeah,
100%. No exaggeration.
100%. That's why. I mean, they're so corrupt, and they own most parts of the military. So there's always tension between military forces that are solid, and those guys have to be masked up to go and enforce things against the cartel because they will have their families hunted down and murdered.
So government does not work hand in hand with the cartel?
It doesn't. It does. That's the thing. So it's a parallel government, right? The idea of it being a parallel government is there's a tension between the two, but the two are governing together. Because remember, the cartels in some of the neighborhoods that they control and things like that, they are the enforcement arm. They keep the peace. It's like the gangsters that used to be in Chicago. Some people loved the gangsters in Chicago, or the corruption in New York when the mafia was running things because things ran. It did work. It was corrupt. It worked after a fashion, but it did work. You had actual justice on the street. So if you were under the protection of the mob boss in the area and somebody raped your daughter and you went and you said, hey, I need justice, what do I need to do? Yeah, we can't allow that sort of thing. We can't allow that guy to have done that. We're going to take care of it. Like there was justice of those forms, and that exists in areas where they are dominated by the cartel, right? That there's also great violence and great horror if you are running against them or if you are in the way of their aims. But most of the time when there's highly organized forces like that and warlords and things like that, there's less. There is chaos, but there's a different form of danger, and there's less chaos. It's an organized structure still.
You kind of get a set of rules.
Yeah.
What you got to do?
These are the rules.
You pay 10% and you're good.
That's it. Don't run crossways with us.
So I was watching that documentary that you were in about the border. Mm-hmm. It was said that cartels have ties with China.
Yes.
So cartels prior to that, they had even Chinese slaves. Mm-hmm. And now some cartel families even have Chinese blood in them.
Yeah, and so so remember, destabilizing the United States as the world power, bring in crime, bring in drugs, the fentanyl. That's what fentanyl is all about, right? Fentanyl is being manufactured, in Mexico using Chinese components, right? Now they've brought more and more of it into Mexico, into the infrastructure there, rather than just having it shipped there. But they've got the raw materials, raw goods to create the labs, all that stuff to create fentanyl in Mexico, and then they distribute it here into our streets so that we have zombies walking our streets and homelessness and crime. And again, destabilization. Break it so we can remake it in all our image. Take the knees out of the United States, destroy them from within, create a cancer that they can't recover from. That's what fentanyl is all about.
Yeah, but they attack the teenagers, the kids.
Yeah.
12-year-olds. And the fentanyl is, I don't know how many people are familiar with that. 2 milligrams, I want to say. It's a lethal dose.
Yeah, kill you. Yeah.
Have you seen this video when a police officer
opens a trunk? Yeah, there's so many of those videos. Yeah, they just boom down.
bear with me. If I am a freak, a psychopath, and I have 100 grams of fentanyl, and I work, for instance, in a facility where oats are being made, oatmeal is being made, I just do this, and hundreds of people will freaking just die.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't know like the life of fentanyl, you know, when it loses its effectiveness or if it does. So, you know, I don't know the science exactly behind all of that. I do know, you know, that like right now, okay, it used to be on our streets that most cops did not carry Narcan, which is the antidote to an opioid overdose. They might every once in a blue moon have to call an ambulance, and then the ambulance comes and Narcan. I mean, most cops going back 20 years ago never delivered, never took people and reversed their ODing. It just didn't exist. Now, it's like every single shift when I'm talking to these guys. Over and over again, they're all night long reviving people. All night long. Every shift, they're carrying it. They're carrying it for themselves because of accidental exposure. So if it's that volatile, you're seeing that happen. Like you cannot, even being a wild person, right now, if I was a wild man and wanted to do drugs and things like that, there is no recreational drugs now that you can be certain don't have some kind of lacing potentially with fentanyl. I mean, it's unbelievable. The danger now. On
tip of this pen, it can kill you.
Yep.
Just as little as this amount.
Yep, exactly. So, when you're talking about psychopath or a very serious terrorist act, I don't know at what concentration, like distribution ability, what would be the psychopath's best delivery of something like that,
but you can be exposed.
But yeah. I mean, again, when you see a cop opening a trunk and just the vapor coming off of that, and he's like, boom, falling to the ground. I mean, it's unbelievable.
You don't even have to be a junkie. Your kid can be exposed to that.
Well, that's the terrifying thing.
On a bus station,
when
in the mall.
When I grew up,
room.
people were we'd all gather in Chatsworth at one of the local gas stations in all of our cars, and people would try to get beer, and we'd figure out who's going to have a party at somebody's house, and we'd have beer, and maybe there'd be somebody that was smoking some weed. That was kind of it. It wasn't a whole bunch of pills. It wasn't all that stuff. Now, I mean, these kids, I've got friends, I mean, one of the guys in that documentary, his son died. He was a friend of mine that I knew about and said, hey, man, I know this happened to you. Would you be willing to be interviewed? And it was just, accidental, kids experimenting.
12-year-old?
I think there was one that was like a 16-year-old in there, but Jamie, I forget it. It's been a while since I remember his story. But yeah, just business colleague. And crazy.
One dose and you're out. So China does that to the US. Do you think that's because 150 years ago to 200 years ago we did? The UK, a little bit of France and the US did the opium wars on China.
So China thinks in terms of many generations, right? So for them to hold some things against us is plausible. I don't know that is the case because, I'm not a scholar on China and I haven't read what they probably have written it down. If they're pissed at us, it's probably somewhere where they're saying that they're, but remember, they think in terms of 100 years. They think in terms of many generations. We do not. And that's a scary thing for us because all the problems that we have right now are generational problems, which require generational solutions.
Yeah.
And we don't think in those terms.
Yeah, so China was terrorized with opium for 100 years. They've lost a lot of people, right? Mm-hmm. That was a big disgrace to the whole
I'm vague
China
about the story,
empire.
But, yeah,
I believe that's just a revenge. If we can do that with via proxy now, why not?
Yeah, I don't discredit that at all. I just don't know.
Tell me about the violence of cartels. A lot of people see the cartels are like Robin Hoods that help the poor in Mexico. They pay the bills. I had one guy on my podcast. He said, yeah, so cartel members are not allowed to rape, kill, something like that. And it was like hard to believe that stuff. But cartels are one of the most violent people on planet Earth, period.
Yeah, not only that, they're very heavily influenced by the occult, too. All of the
occult?
The occult, yeah. So, like, they have all of these, like, occult cards that they leave as their calling cards. And, you know, they're very much influenced by evil, by you know, satanic imagery. They are nihilistic in the sense that they do not value life. You know, they have you know, yeah. I mean, they're very evil organizations. You have to be, and they are influenced by drugs too. I mean, you know, we're talking about they're under the direct influence of drugs when they are out doing some of those violent acts. And there's great guys. I mean, I should get Jason Jones, who's in that documentary, to talk, who knows the issues with the cartel, you know, very, very deeply. But they are trafficking human beings. We witnessed rape trees. I mean,
that was the following question. What's that?
Yeah, so I mean, they rape the women that they are ferrying, you know, through the border. They rape the children. There were kids' underwear on the ground. I think I said panties. I still, you know, I'm a good dad of daughters, and I said there were panties hanging in these trees, and I always laugh because my buddies were like, "Oh, you're the panty guy," and I wish I'd said underwear, but you know, dad of daughters. But they had kids' underwear and women's underwear underneath these trees, along with condoms, lube, and shackles attached to the trees. I mean, it was probably one of the most disturbing things you'll ever see.
Just
to know
you rape a human being and you hang the
just to tie them up and, you know, discard the underwear, and so, you know, like a trophy, you know, throw it up into the trees and just disintegrating in the sun like dozens. And I mean, horrible scene, rape, blood, condoms, spent everything, disgusting.
So you've been at the border. How does it look like physically? The fence, but there is a fence, and then there is a place where the fence ends, right?
Yeah, so here's what's interesting about the border. So, you know, they mocked, you know, the left, the Democrats mocked President Trump about the border. Now, they used to always talk about how we need to secure the border too, right? It was only in this, you know, most recent day and age that they decided that the border wasn't worth protecting, or it was in their best interests to have open borders. Remember, that's the attack on sovereignty. That's really what that is about, you know, open borders. But the wall itself is very impressive. Okay, the day after the Biden administration came into power, all of construction stopped, and the materials started getting sold off or just left to just lay in the sun and rust.
But why it is being built only now in 2021 when he took off the office?
Because what happened was, after they did that, then they started to realize that this is a big issue. So people,
I mean, why the wall wasn't built like 50 years ago?
Oh, yeah. Well, because we're fools. And because we don't have forethought, and because we don't, you know, I just don't think that we had the political will, and we also had the conflict between businesses that would like cheap labor, and this is including Republican people that allowed this to happen. That's what amnesty was about, allowing workers, instead of creating some kind of exchange program, you know, temporary workers coming in and out, you know, bless the country with, you know, creating something that works for them. Instead of figuring out something like that that's also good for our economy, because remember, we devastated our own manufacturing base. We destroyed and ended up importing because we couldn't afford to develop things here. We ended up sending it overseas so we could have an endless supply of cheap goods, right? So that's why you're, you know, washing machines only last 5 years now, or all, everything's planned obsolescence to keep a hyper consumerism culture going. Whereas we used to build, a refrigerator, but that you bought, 40 years ago would last 40 years if you cared for it. I mean, it's amazing how we used to build things so solidly. So I think you had that complication of wanting cheap labor. So corporatists, right, which believe that they should be, the ones that are really in charge, right? Wanting cheap labor, wanting to advance, get wealthy, did not want a perfectly secure border. We can secure a border. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Look at Egypt's border between Egypt and and Palestine. I mean, it is secure. You could have secure borders, so that's not impossible. But the Trump wall that was being built, because that's one of the reasons why he won, because that issue is important to the average American. They realize that they want security. So the average American, the average working class, they recognize that. And when he was build the wall, that resonated with people. But that wall, when it is complete, it's impressive. Okay, and there's areas where it's complete. And complete means not just the physical barrier of the wall, but lights, cameras, sensors, all of that, guards, patrol, everything to secure that thing. And it is cool looking and impressive and gnarly.
But why didn't Donald Trump build the wall?
Well, you remember there was a fight over the expense. There was a tug of war between the Congress authorizing the funds, because again, we've got the branches, the checks and balances. They weren't approving the $3 or $5 billion that it was supposed to cost. They were not approving and allowing and releasing those funds. Meanwhile, they're sending billions of dollars to other things and other places and sending it overseas.
But are you allowed to get the private funds? For instance, I believe there are numerous billionaires that would donate right now $100 million just to get the border.
Yeah, they're probably built. Right now. You could probably do that. At that time, I think the tenor of the conversation was a lot different, and so, there's probably some complicating mechanisms for private money building something like that, but